first of all, I just want to say thanks so much for taking time to chat with me today. And I appreciate you reminding the old guy where we had met 3 years ago. I'm just curious. So what's your role today, and what are some of your job responsibilities in that role today?
Yeah, so Joe, I was just appointed the Chief Risk Officer here at ENB back in January.
Congratulations, man.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's there's a lot of moving pieces to this role. So we outsource our internal audit, but I serve as the audit liaison, audit manager, if you want to call me that. So I do all the work with our audit firm. I help facilitate all the meetings, all the scoping. I don't do the scoping. I just help, I help the interaction between the audit and the individuals of each area being audited. I do have a seat at the audit committee where I'm there to help present, to help answer any questions and address any ongoing concerns with the audit committee. That's just one hat. One of the things I spend a decent amount of time on is insurance.
Okay.
As you know, we've got a lot of different insurance policies as a bank, so I oversee that process. Insider trading falls to me. But then outside of me, I have a team of 6 that reports up through me, and that's compliance, security. I have credit reports up through me, and then I have loan review, and then there's a department we call real estate risk, which is our appraisal department, construction, environmental, and any insurance claims that a customer has where there's damage to their property. That role also reports up through me.
Okay.
So a lot of moving pieces, back office functions, but we're keeping the bank safe and sound. That's our goal.
Absolutely. So in many cases, I talk to people that live in the information security world, InfoSec.
Sure.
And I think sometimes people confuse auditing with information security and how is risk viewed, et cetera. So I'm curious, from your perspective, when you talk about your role within auditing and what that means, how would you compare to what you do in auditing to information security?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So from the standpoint of like information security, are you meaning more of like the testing that our information security department does?
Sure. So as an example, when Reclamier comes into an organization, many times we're asked to perform a security risk assessment.
Okay.
And so what we're looking at is people, process, and technology. And we're trying to determine from a risk perspective, what's the overall security posture or profile of the particular organization.
Sure.
So policies and procedures, do they have them? Are they up to date? Are they practiced? And can you prove that you do these things?
Yeah.
When we take a look at the world of technology, obviously we're way beyond the conversation of do you have a properly configured firewall, but more importantly, what are we doing about true real-time antivirus and malware? What are we doing about endpoint detection and response?
Sure.
Really those, what you would call 21st century kind of elements to figure out what an organization is doing. And so that's really what I'm talking about when I talk about information security. Okay. And so in your world as an audit professional, I'm just wondering how they compare, like how do they interact, and what are maybe some of the crossovers that you are involved in?
Yeah, it's interesting because you talk about audit, and one of the audits that does get an annual look is information security, because if you talk about the top risks of a bank, cybersecurity, if it's not the top, it's at the top, right? And so we're looking at policies and procedures. We're looking at penetration testing, vulnerability testing, all that stuff on the information security side. But even more so, we look at that holistically across the bank. You mentioned the policies and procedures, and are they actually being performed the way that the auditors are being told they're being performed? Absolutely. That's one of the major things every area across the bank is being looked at for how recent have your policies been updated? Are they being looked at? Your procedures, show me how they work. Let's verify that it's not just on a piece of paper, but yes, it's actually being done. And that, the bigger piece there with procedures is SOX, right? So as far as our controls, our internal control environment, you've got all these SOX controls. We've got a couple hundred of them. Show me how they worked, because they might be 2, 3, 4 years old. They haven't been, they haven't changed in that long, but are they still working the way you're telling me they've been working?
Right.
So that we know that when your management signs off on your 10Q, your 10K, that everything's as it should be.
So when you think about information security from your experience and maybe even in your position,
sure,
do you find in banking today that the vast majority of information security is being managed internally? Is it being managed externally, or is there some combination thereof that seems to be the norm in financial services today?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say, anecdotally, I would say it's probably those banks that are more than $700-8 million in assets probably have an inside department in information security. Below that, I'm thinking most of those banks are either outsourcing or having a mix where they may only have one person, but they need some outside help to do different things. But I can tell you, I think it makes sense as you get bigger. There's just so many more things that need to happen at all times.
Right.
I think we have a team of 3 now in our information security department, whereas I guess 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, I don't even think we had a bona fide information security officer.
Wow.
So
okay.
The risk has just grown and grown. And I know working with our ISO, it really helps to have him on site.
Sure.
40 hours a week. He can pull together a team if needed. He can provide real-time updates, and he knows the systems, he knows the people, and I think that really goes a long way.
Gotcha. So in your role today, what would you say are your top, 2 or 3 challenges? What are the things that really kind of creep up on you that really become that top of mind thing that you are most concerned about?
Yeah, and do you want to know just from an information security standpoint or banking in general?
I think I'd like to start with banking and then information security. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think information security is going to be one of those 3. If you look at everything going on with ransomware, it's here. It's very much present. Big company, small company, it doesn't matter. It seems like if somebody wants to hack you, they're going to.
Right.
And so it's looking at that and saying, let's play this out. If we really have a ransom event, what are we going to do? And having the right controls in place there. The other thing that I find so interesting is a couple of years ago, if you had an incident where your customer's information was hacked into, it was a major reputation risk, right?
Sure.
Major damage. Sure. And now it seems like it's become so prevalent where, you almost ask yourself, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when and how much damage is there, because
we see that all the time.
Yeah, even Equifax, they got hit, but did they really suffer for it? They had a lot of controls in place. Could they do things better? Probably. But it seems like we're moving away from an information security setting where it's, oh no, if we get hacked, we're in a lot of trouble, versus, oh yeah, people are getting hacked all the time. The news cycle, it's not as interesting anymore. Now it's ransomware. Have you got hit with a ransom? And we don't, the media doesn't seem to care so much about, what was encrypted. It's more of, well, how much did you pay?
Yeah.
It's just very different. But so yeah, the ransom piece is a big one, and obviously securing our data and making sure it's as safe as we can have it. The other pieces with banking, credit's always going to be top of mind.
Sure.
what's the next black swan event? I was just reading an article this morning about, or not an article, I was actually reading watching an Instagram reel. Here's, talking to a millennial here. And there was a realtor promoting her real estate business and talking about how, we're not in another real estate bubble because of X, Y, Z. And, she could be right, but it's the complacency. It's the, it'll never happen again feeling,
right,
where we can get ourselves into trouble because there might be something that we're not even looking at that's really going to take us by surprise.
Yeah. Now, if you kind of dial that into specifically, and you may have already mentioned it about information security,
sure.
Are there elements in that particular landscape that concern you more than another?
Yeah. It's a good question.
So as one of our clients, it was interesting. They came to us because during an audit, they were asked, I think it was a year or two ago, they were asked, do you have an incident response plan? Do you have an IRP?
Yeah.
Which is very different than business continuity or disaster recovery, quite frankly, right? Okay.
Yep.
And so when you start talking, and it was one of those things where 2 years ago, that was a very kind of a question in passing. Now, a year later, the auditor's question is, well, we asked you about it. You actually haven't done anything about it. And so, it's kind of like one of those kind of things in a classroom where the teacher says, okay, pay attention because this is going to be on the test.
Yeah, right.
And now this particular bank auditor is saying, listen, you need to pay attention to an incident response plan because it's going to be on your next audit.
Right.
So long story short, they came to us. They've been a customer of ours for a really long time, and we were able to walk them through the development, the implementation, tabletop testing, et cetera. So I'm wondering, when you start talking about ransomware, the idea of, do we know what the playbook looks like?
Right.
Do people know what they're supposed to do? And more importantly, what they're not supposed to do if in fact we have some security incident prior to it evolving into a breach?
Sure.
And I think that's what's really interesting. And what I find is that there are a lot of assumptions being made by folks, especially around incident response planning.
Okay.
I think that the other area is security awareness training. What are we doing around security awareness training? Because obviously, I think we can buy the greatest technology and implement it and evaluate it, et cetera. But at the end of the day, our employees remain, for lack of a better term, our weakest link. Not because they're malicious, not because they don't care, but the attacks have gotten much more sophisticated. Logos aren't blurry anymore, and we don't have spelling and grammar errors anymore, right?
No, we don't.
Yeah, they do an incredible job. And so, the whole world of security awareness training is evolving and maturing in and of itself, where the old time of, well, we do it once a year and we send it to your desktop and hopefully you do it.
Right.
So, I'm just wondering if there are items like that, from your perspective as an auditor, like in information security, are they a concern for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the ransomware piece for sure, and it's not just the employee education. Honestly, I think it's the customer education as well. And I speak to that not only from an information security standpoint, but also overseeing the security function that rolls up through me. Fraud is always changing, right? So I look at fraud and information security very similarly, where the technology just keeps changing, or they keep getting a little bit smarter and a little bit wiser, or they become a little bit more cavalier in their tactics, right? So you talk about information security, and we do a monthly phishing email every month, a spoof, fake phishing email to see how many people click on the link. And, obviously those are going to be very, very good because you've got people that this is what they do. And so they want this to look as real as possible to hope that they maybe they wake us up as employees to say, wow, this could happen to me.
Right.
I really need to be vigilant.
Right.
But even on the customer side too, these people are getting extremely clever. They prey on the most vulnerable. You talked about the weakest link. I was just talking to somebody the other day that was speaking about how difficult it is to talk an elderly person out of sending $10,000 or $20,000 to their quote unquote nephew that reached out to them saying that they have an emergency. And so I think it really does come down to education. Yeah. And that for me is the key, is how are we educating our employees and our customers from an information security standpoint and a security standpoint. You've got these individuals who are convincing teenagers, young adults, elderly. It's not just the elderly, it's everybody.
Sure.
To give me your online banking credentials so I can do a transaction for you that you think is legitimate, but now all of a sudden you're out however much money.
Sure.
These, like you said, these phishing emails are getting more sophisticated. I received a Facebook message from a friend of mine the other day that seemed very legitimate. Mm-hmm. And I was on my Apple iPhone. I clicked on the link, and so I think I'm okay. Had I clicked on it on my PC, I'm not sure I would have been.
Sure.
But it sounded very, very much like something that person would have said.
Okay.
And then as soon as I clicked the link, I realized, oh crap. So it's one of those things where it's just constant vigilance, it's constant education, from both standpoints.
So if you were in a position where you had the ability to, talk to a group of your peers,
sure,
in the banking space, specifically auditors, and they had either uncertainty about information security or questions about information security, what advice would you give them on, okay, as an auditor, these are the other things that you need to consider. These are some of the things you really need to pay attention to as an auditor. What advice would you give?
Wow. A couple of things come to mind. The first thing would be making sure that the bank has a clear process for who owns the information security piece at the bank. If you don't have an ISO, maybe it's your chief risk officer, maybe it's an operations manager, it's somebody who, if there is an event, you have a single person that can take ownership and start to move through an incident or a breach.
Great point. Okay.
Another topic would be looking to see who are their outside vendors. Do you have an attorney that you can call that has the background in information security that can help you work through this type of thing?
Okay.
What type of cyber insurance does the bank have in case there is an incident? I remember talking to my predecessor years ago saying, can't really get cybersecurity insurance. It's too, it's too nebulous. It's too much out there. Well, now you have to have it.
Sure.
And it's not cheap, but you have to have it. Mm-hmm. Something else I think too is that would be important to have would be, I had it on the tip of my tongue. The other thing I think is to have a relationship with somebody in law enforcement. So I remember a couple of years ago, I was at a conference where somebody from the FBI came and said, look, we are here to help you. If you don't have anybody at your bank that has a contact number for somebody from the FBI, make sure they do that, because it's possible that if there's some sort of fraud or some sort of breach and you can contact us as soon as possible, we might be able to work with you to limit the damage.
Great point. Well, I think that, to your point earlier, it's only going to continue to get more complicated and more complex. What I said to some folks not too long ago is I think that the speed at which incidents are occurring and the complexity and volume is only going to ramp itself up, because there's obviously value in your customers' personal information. And what's really kind of spooky is the number of transactions that are occurring on the dark web.
Sure.
And the fact that many organizations have no idea that credentials are out on the dark web because they're either not buying the technology to find that out, they're not purchasing the monitoring service to be looking for credentials that are being transacted out on the dark web. And the reality is that that has a potential negative impact on the organization.
Sure.
And on the individual for that matter, right? So, there are a number of, I think, complexities that will continue to go through the remainder of this year and into 22 that people have to pay attention to. And I think the more conversations that can occur between auditors, information security professionals,
sure,
risk managers, operations managers, et cetera, the better off we're going to be. Because what we try to get people to understand is that, you're never 100% secure, right? I
Nope.
mean, you just can't be. But the reality is that what you want to be able to do is you want to prove to your cyber insurance company that you provided reasonable care.
Yes.
You want to be able to demonstrate to stakeholders, shareholders, and customers that you provided reasonable care. And then, quite frankly, in the event that there is a security incident that evolves into a breach, you want to be able to demonstrate to the general public,
yes,
that you were able to provide reasonable care, right?
Yes.
And so, it's no longer okay not to have password management, ID management. It's no longer okay not to have two-factor authentication.
Right. Right.
So, it's fascinating to me, at least, in being able to talk to people across Pennsylvania and throughout the Mid-Atlantic area, where they understand it, but it's still evolving and it's still changing. And I don't think that's ever going to be any different. I really, in fact, if anything, I think it will become even more difficult.
Sure. And you wonder at what point, we've spent all this time lately working on two-factor, multi-factor authentication. The regulators just came out with a bunch of guidance on how to implement multi-factor authentication. Oh,
wow. Okay.
Just in the last month or so, I believe there was some interagency guidance out there. And it was a couple pages. It wasn't monstrous. And you just wonder, though, a year from now, 2 years from now, what is the landscape going to look like? Right now, multi-factor is where everybody's headed, but where are the gaps in multi-factor that we're not thinking of? Where are the cracks that might form? Are we ever going to have to move to some sort of triple factor authentication? Is it just going to get worse? Or are we going to hit a point where we're able to put up some kind of roadblock to really start to nip this stuff in the bud? I don't know.
Yeah, like I said, it's definitely fascinating, and I think that as long as people like yourself and others are willing to have those kind of conversations and are willing to be proactive rather than reactive, I think that's the way that you at least can kind of break even. I don't know if you ever get ahead. Because the reality is, listen, you've got folks that they are being able to make an incredible amount of money by being the bad guy on the outside, breaking into your bank, your hospital, your manufacturing organization, et cetera. And so they have a great deal to win and almost nothing to lose, because identifying, finding them, taking them to court, et cetera, is pretty much a non-existent tactic, right?
Sure.
So the reality is that, you've always got to be able to stay as up to date as you can. And I think that, you've got a really great attitude and just being open-minded about having those conversations. So
sure. It's important.
Any other last minute pieces of advice that you would give to somebody that's kind of sitting in your chair today as an auditor, when they think that they may want to know more about information security, or they're challenged by information security, et cetera?
Sure. That's the other thing I'll point out is the regulatory piece of it. There's a lot of information out there by the interagency, the FFIC, the OCC, the FDIC. There's a couple tools for banks. I know that the OCC has an information security tool if you're an OCC bank. The regulators, they put a lot of money into an investment into information security. They know it's out there. They know it's a major risk for banks, and who better to ask than those folks that are the ones responsible for keeping you running smoothly.
Gotcha. Nick, I really appreciate you doing this for me.
Sure.
And,
My pleasure.
we'll wrap it up and then we'll go from there, man.